Picture a quiet residential street on a Tuesday morning. Everyone else has already left for work, but parked in the driveway sits a car that hasn't moved yet. Its owner is standing beside it, not rushing, not distracted. He's listening. A low rumble begins, then builds into something that fills the entire street. Neighbors glance out their windows. Some shake their heads. Some secretly smile, but none of them fully understand what just happened. That sound wasn't just an engine starting. That was a statement. That was a personality announcing itself to the world without a single word being spoken. People who deliberately make their cars louder than necessary occupy a fascinating and often misunderstood corner of human psychology. To the casual observer, a modified exhaust system or a roaring engine note seems like simple attention-seeking behavior, something immature, perhaps even antisocial. But when examined through a psychological lens, the picture becomes far more complex and deeply human. These individuals are not simply making noise. They are communicating something essential about who they are, what they value, and what they need from the world around them. To understand this behavior, it helps to first understand what sound actually does to the human brain. Sound is not passive. It does not simply enter the ear and disappear. It triggers emotional responses, physiological reactions, and psychological states in ways that visual stimuli often cannot match. A deep, powerful engine sound activates the same primitive brain regions associated with alertness, power, and dominance. Evolutionary psychologists suggest that loud, low-frequency sounds in nature historically signaled the presence of something large and powerful. The brain responds to these sounds automatically, instinctively, without rational filtering. When someone builds a car that produces exactly this kind of sound, they are not just modifying metal. They are engineering a psychological experience, both for themselves and for everyone around them. There is a man named Jason who grew up in a quiet, unremarkable suburb in the American Midwest. His father was a reserved man, soft-spoken, the kind of person who moved through life without leaving much of an impression. Jason loved his father but watched him get overlooked again and again, in meetings, in conversations, in social situations. His father's voice simply did not carry. When Jason was 17, a neighbor drove past in a modified muscle car. The sound shook the windows of their house. His father looked up from his newspaper for the first time in what seemed like hours. Jason noticed that. He never forgot it. By the time he was 22, Jason had installed a full aftermarket exhaust system on his own car. He described the moment he first heard it as feeling genuinely seen for the first time, not by others necessarily, but by himself. This story reveals one of the deepest psychological functions that sound modification serves. It is about presence, the feeling of taking up space in the world in a way that cannot be ignored. Psychologists who study self-concept and identity formation have long recognized that one of the most fundamental human needs is the need to feel that one's existence registers, that it has weight and consequence. For people who grew up feeling invisible, overlooked, or consistently underestimated, a loud car becomes something far more than a mechanical preference. It becomes a daily affirmation, a rolling declaration that they are here, that they matter, that the world must acknowledge them whether it chooses to or not. But visibility is only one dimension of this behavior. The psychological relationship between sound and power runs even deeper. Power, in psychological terms, is not simply about domination over others. It is about the felt sense of agency and capability within one's own life. Research in behavioral psychology consistently shows that humans who feel powerless in major domains of their lives, professionally, romantically, socially, will seek and find symbolic expressions of power in smaller, more controllable areas. A car that sounds aggressive and commanding provides exactly this. The driver who feels overlooked at work climbs into a vehicle that refuses to be ignored. The person who struggles to assert themselves in conversations sits behind a wheel that speaks loudly enough for everyone. The gap between internal experience and external expression gets narrowed, at least temporarily, by the sound of that engine. There is also something profound happening at the level of identity construction. Psychologists studying consumer behavior and personal identity have found that people use objects, particularly vehicles, to project not just who they are but who they aspire to be. A car that sounds powerful communicates capability. It communicates that the driver is someone not to be underestimated, someone with force behind them. For younger enthusiasts especially, still in the process of building their sense of self, this projection matters enormously. The modified exhaust system becomes a kind of character statement, a way of choosing the version of themselves they want the world to encounter. Consider a young woman named Priya who spent most of her academic years being told she was too quiet, too gentle, too easy to overlook. She excelled academically but found that her accomplishments rarely translated into social visibility. When she began modifying her car at 24, starting with a new intake, then progressing to a full exhaust system, something changed in how she moved through the world. She described arriving at locations differently. Parking in a way that felt intentional, existing in public spaces with a confidence that her car seemed to lend her. The sound wasn't aggression. It was, in her words, a spine, something external that helped her develop something internal. The community dimension of loud car culture adds yet another layer of psychological richness. Enthusiasts who share a passion for powerful exhaust notes and aggressive engine sounds form tight social networks built around this shared sensory experience. These communities develop their own vocabularies, their own aesthetics, their own rituals. The weekend gathering where modified cars line up and owners rev their engines in sequence is not simply a display. It is a communal ritual, a shared celebration of a value system that the mainstream world consistently dismisses or criticizes. Belonging to such a community provides the psychological experience of being understood without explanation, of finding others who feel that life is meant to be heard, not merely observed quietly from a distance. Psychologist Abraham Maslow's famous hierarchy of needs placed belonging and esteem as central pillars of human psychological health. Loud car communities address both simultaneously. Members belong to a tribe that recognizes and respects their passion, and within that tribe, they earn status through knowledge, skill, and the quality of their builds. This alternative status hierarchy is genuinely important for people who do not find their place in conventional social structures. Someone who commands little authority in professional settings may be deeply respected among enthusiasts who admire the sophistication of their exhaust tuning or the depth of their mechanical knowledge. There is also the pure sensory dimension that deserves serious attention. The experience of driving a loud, powerful car produces measurable physiological responses. Heart rate increases slightly. Alertness sharpens. A mild adrenaline response activates the nervous system. Neuroscientists who study auditory stimulation have documented that certain low-frequency sounds, particularly those produced by high-performance engines, trigger dopamine release in specific brain regions. This is not metaphorical. The pleasure that enthusiasts describe when hearing their engine perform is neurologically real. It is a genuine reward response, as authentic as any other source of pleasure that psychology recognizes and validates. The countercultural element of this behavior also carries significant psychological weight. Every society maintains unspoken rules about acceptable noise levels, appropriate behavior in public spaces, and the kind of presence one is permitted to occupy. Modified loud cars deliberately and consciously violate these norms. This violation is not arbitrary. It is purposeful. It represents a form of self-assertion that says conventional expectations do not fully contain this individual. For people who feel constrained by social rules, by professional expectations, by family roles that limit self-expression, the loud car becomes a legal, relatively harmless way of refusing total compliance. It is rebellion measured in decibels, a declaration of individuality that costs nothing in legal consequence but delivers significant psychological relief. Interestingly, research into sensation-seeking behavior, a well-documented personality dimension studied extensively by psychologist Marvin Zuckerman, reveals that individuals who score high on this trait consistently seek out intense sensory experiences across multiple domains. They tend toward activities, environments, and even social situations that provide strong stimulation. For high sensation seekers, a quiet, understated vehicle may feel genuinely uncomfortable, even claustrophobic. The loud car is not excessive to them. It is calibrated to their nervous system's actual requirements. Their relationship with sound is not about disturbing others. It is about feeding an authentic neurological need for intensity and engagement. What the outside world rarely considers is the emotional relationship that develops between these enthusiasts and their vehicles. A car that has been deliberately tuned to sound a particular way carries enormous personal significance. Every time the engine note performs exactly as intended, it confirms competence. It validates the hours of research, the financial investment, the technical problem-solving. It provides a daily micro-experience of mastery, a small but consistent signal to the brain that the person is capable, effective, and successful at something that genuinely matters to them. In a world where meaningful feedback is often rare and delayed, This immediate physical confirmation of one's own competence carries surprising psychological power. In the end, people who make their cars louder than necessary are not simply making noise. They are solving psychological problems in one of the most human ways imaginable. They are finding presence when they have felt invisible. They are building identity when the world has offered them limited tools for self-expression. They are creating community around a shared sensory language. They are feeding neurological needs that conventional life consistently underaddresses. And they are doing all of this through a form of engineering that is simultaneously technical and deeply personal. The next time that sound fills the street and windows rattle gently in their frames, perhaps the more interesting question is not why someone would make a car that loud, but what it must feel like to finally be heard.